hot topic for content creators. This is where I pitch a hot topic to you, and then you turn around, create your own content on said topic. Merit versus market. And the subject I'd like to focus on for this convo revolves around book covers. Specifically, some people seem to believe that an author's book cover will determine the success of that work, which I can only assume that by success they are referring to sales figures. Perhaps there is some merit to that belief, but I think some individuals can get too hung up on the idea of cover art, as if that is the end-all, be-all of selling a story on the open market. Now, I know there are people who think it's clever to assume that just because an author slaps some money down for their book's cover art, that should serve as an indicator to the quality of the contents contained therein. I know this may come as a surprise for some of you indie artists out there, but not everybody in the underground scene is a broke boy. So for me, a fancy cover doesn't say much beyond the fact that someone decided to spend some money. I mean, it's possible they're trying to make up for something, like someone who feels the need to flaunt their wealth for social validation. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, some of these book covers are just downright gaudy, if you ask me. Sometimes to the point where the actual content of the book can be considered an injustice to the artwork featured on its cover. To me, that's the equivalent of somebody who puts expensive rims on a cheap vehicle, especially when we're talking about books. I just want to say to some of these so-called authors, hasn't anyone ever told you it's what's on the inside that counts? But I digress. Needless to say, I'm not impressed by an author's willingness to throw a few bones to an artist, because that has nothing to do with the story. And for those of you who may be under the impression that your cover needs a Norman Rockwell in order to sell, then I would say keep in mind that sometimes a basic graphic design will work just fine. What I suggest is that you take a look at some of the books on the so-called bestseller lists before you go investing 3 or 4 figs into a fancy cover for your glorified fanfic. Okay? No offense, but I think you'll thank me later. People who buy books based on cover art remind me of the sycophants responsible for propping up self-proclaimed influencers across today's social media wasteland. Thanks to them, algorithmically driven search engines seem to think that everyone and their brother should buy into the pretty girl said what content. Now just take that same concept, but apply it to cover art. And think about the kind of person who buys a book based upon face value alone. This is why I say that a book's cover, or rating for that matter, isn't the best indicator of quality in terms of story. Because it's as if some of these people read books and think, what in the hell is this thing about? Who is this character? Pretty girl said what? I don't know. But she's pretty though. So I'm going to give it 5 stars. Why? Because vagina. I don't know if you guys know this, but apparently sex sells. And this may come as a shock to you, but some book covers are meant to tickle your base sensibilities. That's right. There are plenty of publishers who have no problem putting softcore TNA on full display front and center upon the cover in order to stimulate some sales. This salacious cover art style is typically associated with niche subgenres within romance or erotica, and it's done on purpose as a tactic for targeting a specific market demographic. You know who you are. Excuse me. It's actually quite common to see similar cover art styles being utilized by different authors who are marketing genre fiction. And although it's not a practice that I personally care for, I don't go as far as to condemn it either. What I'm saying is that I understand the logic, at least from a marketing standpoint. It's all about making something new feel familiar to you. So there's a certain degree of comfort and confidence built into the packaging itself. Your mind has the ability to recognize patterns with just a mere glance, which means a reader shopping for a new book may subconsciously associate certain feelings from a past reading experience with their new purchase, simply based on how the cover looks. Speaking of which, there is one specific art style that I have grown to dislike, and that is the cross promotional book cover. Sometimes, when a work of literature is adapted to film, the publishers will release a new edition of the book. The new edition will have cover art that basically serves as an advertisement for the movie, adaptation, or television show. I would say video game, but usually it's the other way around in that case. The video game is released first, and then all its byproducts follow. Case in point, I have here Gears of War, written by Karen Travis, a #1 New York Times best-selling author. Apparently, her claim to fame is creating right-to-market media tie-ins. And as you can see right here on the cover of this specific novel, it's advertised as, quote, the official prequel to the award-winning video game. I used to be obsessed with the Gears of War franchise, and best believe me, I could hold my own in the multiplayer too. Let's just say I was capable of maintaining a healthy KD ratio as far as that goes. Needless to say, this book is a product of its time and was clearly created just to capitalize upon all the gamers who just couldn't get enough. In my defense, however, the campaigns from the first 3 games contain some damn good storytelling, and I always thought the IP deserved an adaptation. This is about as far as my obsession ever got before I decided to stop. I never went so far as to fill up my home with little figurines and friggin' Funko Pops. Now, I do own a couple other novels that did receive film adaptations as well as cross-promotional book covers. Those titles are Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke and Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Maybe you've heard of them. I can do this here. Okay. Now both are classic novels that have stood the test of time, but are also 2 examples of why I dislike cross-promo book covers. Every time I glance at these fine works of literature, I am reminded of the subpar adaptations that they received, which some of you may have heard me mention before. Maybe someday I'll get around to replacing each copy with a more respectable edition worthy of collecting dust upon my bookshelf. So I think that about covers everything I wanted to say on the subject. Have you ever judged a book by its cover? Do you think expensive cover art carries any merit in regard to the story itself or help with the heavy lifting in terms of marketing? Have you ever been duped into reading a shit story because you fell head over heels for a book cover?